Yes.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming and coming back. Welcome. Welcome to the Wells College Visiting Writers Series. I'm Dan Rosenberg, the director of the series. Hi. Hi, Lainey. And I'm really excited for tonight's event. Ethan has just recently given this incredible master class on character design, and we got to watch him quickly draw out characters of our collective imagination, and we discovered that we're all dark and miserable and unwilling to offer a happy character for Ethan to draw.
The turtle was kind of funny.
Turtle was funny in a horrible miserly kind of way. But for this part of the evening, we get to dive deeper into some of Ethan's work. And so how tonight's going to go is I'll introduce Ethan Young, who will present and discuss some of his creative projects, which range across several kinds of visual art and writing. There are going to be a lot of natural breaks and sort of opportunities for conversation. And so what we're hoping is that when you encounter something that makes you want to ask a question or make a comment or celebrate something that you saw or heard, that you just jump in and do so. And there will be time maybe at the end for more traditional Q&A as well, but we want this to be more of an open and dynamic conversation. I'll also note that Ethan has brought 2 different books for sale, and you can purchase them through me if you would like, cash, cards, Venmo, favors, whatever. PG favors, and Ethan will be glad to sign your copy of the book. I'll remind you of that at the end, but for now I'll get into my introduction. So, Ethan Young was born and raised in New York City. He's an award-winning cartoonist, a prolific cover artist, and a character designer at Marvel Studios Animation. We love Marvel. Marvel is great. We love Marvel. Hi. His graphic novels include Nanjing, The Burning City, which won the 2016 Reuben Award for the Best Graphic Novel, along with Eisner and Harvey nominations, and The Dragon Path, which is the newest novel, and Space Bear, Life Between Panels, which collects his Tales comics to create a kind of fantastical autobiography, and The Battle of Bridget Lee. Young has also contributed to comic anthologies Firefly, Watch How I Soar, and comic book tattoo, Tales Inspired by Tori Amos, which is a thing I want to ask about.
Okay.
Comic book covers include work, you can see some of the covers up here over my left shoulder. DC's Dark Crisis, The Walking Dead, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Stranger Things, Buffy, Angel, Firefly, Terminator, many, many others. So Nanjing is probably his breakout work. It's a black and white graphic novel exploring with intimate detail a moment that's usually understood as part of the beginning of World War II in the Pacific. It's the Nanjing Massacre, also known as the Rape of Nanjing. It's one of the most horrifying events in World War II, but far less familiar to Western audiences than the atrocities that happened in Europe. The graphic novel focuses on 2 fictional Chinese soldiers trying to escape their city amid several other desperate refugees who you meet over the course of the book. Publishers Weekly, in a starred review, called it stunning, stirring historical fiction by a creator at the height of his craft.
Oh.
Yeah. Ethan's latest book, The Dragon Path, is a bit different. It's a middle grade story full of magic, myth, and a giant cat with a unicorn horn. My son Miles reviewed it by saying, "It's really good, I like it, let's read it again." He's not going to get a job at Publishers Weekly, but that is high praise nonetheless, particularly because it shows how Ethan was able to layer a complex narrative so it would please readers ages 8 to 41. Miles loves, of course, the magical giant cat, the determined, brave protagonist, Prince Sing. He reacted strongly and warmly to the clear influences of Studio Ghibli and Avatar: The Last Airbender that are in here. And I'm not above a giant cat or a Miyazaki homage, but I also loved this book for the careful and sensitive exploration of displacement, of loyalty, responsibility, what the meaning of home is. And Ethan has said, you actually said it earlier in the master class, right, that the book is very much about diaspora, about characters trying to go home to a place they've never actually been before. And this concern makes particular sense to him. Ethan is a Chinese-American man who has never been to China, whose parents immigrated before he was born. He's lived a life in between, perceived as Asian by the white people around him, but speaks Cantonese, I've read this in an interview, with an accent that, according to you, breaks your mother's heart.
Yeah.
Right. This perspective, I think, really shapes a lot of Ethan's work, and his willingness to explore these complicated issues of identity with sensitivity and nuance is part of what makes the work so captivating. The last bit about Ethan that I'm going to say in this introduction is that he loves cats and used to be an animal rescuer, which he also talked about in the master class. This is important because my understanding is that our dorms are a veritable zoo of emotional support critters. Of all kinds, and apparently he used to live with, was it 15 kitties?
Yeah.
All right. So he's already basically a Wellesian at heart, and I hope he feels at home with us here already, but let's go ahead and welcome him to our community anyway. Everyone, Ethan Young.
Thanks, buddy. Well, thank you again for everyone who returned from the previous segment. I had fun drawing all the stuff. I'm sorry if I came off as a little bit nervous, but this is the first time I've spoken to an audience in 2.5 years. My face was sweating profusely. My glasses were steaming up. So we talked a little bit about the more expanded idea of storytelling in that previous segment, in addition to the character design. And a reading is obviously a traditional reading is a little weird for a comic book since it's visual, and you're not children, so I'm not going to read you the Dragon Path and make funny voices. So with Nanjing, I think what I actually want to do is I want to go over the beginning, the first 9 to 10 pages of it, and I want to talk to you guys about how do we establish a story, how do we establish the motivations of the character right off the bat, and how do we establish urgency right off the bat, because I do think that, like I said earlier, a really great editorial note that you should have in your mind is start as close to the end as possible. Don't make the audience wait for the things that you don't want to wait for, and especially when you're starting off as a writer and a creator. Don't expect a second or a third book to resolve issues that you can resolve right away, just because publishing is a monstrous industry that doesn't like you and doesn't like me. And so you can always put your best foot forward, and you can always pour your entire heart and soul into a piece of work. And unfortunately, sometimes maybe a book sells, maybe it doesn't. Maybe you go work for Marvel after.
We love Marvel.
We do. At the beginning of this story in Nanjing, basically, it's, what's the term? Media res? We open in media res. So you're already in action. And action is probably an insensitive word to use here, because what we're really exploring is the atmosphere and the milieu of what was happening during the bombardment and during the invasion and during the siege of a very under-defended capital of the Republic of China in the 1930s. So in comic books, we just call this an establishment shot. That's really just all it is. The size of it, the scope of it, it can vary from comic to comic, from story to story, but here, given its title, given its tone, and given the subject matter, I felt that it was important to kind of paint in just a very, very stark artwork, just how almost engulfed the reader is about to feel. And we move here, and just some content warning, there are some some more gruesome elements, but because I am aware I was aware while I was making this that although people are going to enter this book expecting some degree of gore or some degree of atrocity, I also don't want to over embellish, and I especially want to respect the sensitivity that a subject matter like this requires, just because after a while it could become gratuitous, and I feel like sometimes in our media landscape we can become desensitized to that kind of gratuitousness. Dan, is that a word?
Sure.
Okay.
Yes.
I was going to say gratuity, and I know that means something different as well. So then we meet our hero, and with this character, the captain, he's essentially the man with no name. He is essentially, he has the sense of a drifter in a way, in that you don't know too much about him, but from his look, from his silhouette, you can kind of tell, okay, this is my protagonist. Now, he's coming from the background there. You can kind of see just here, like the mist. He's just breaking off a little bit. And you can tell right off the bat, but in these first 3 pages, what I'm trying to tell you is there is danger, and this person is trying to get out of danger as soon as possible. He's looking over his shoulder here. He hears noises. In 3 pages, I want you to know exactly what this person, the kind of trouble this person is already in. And so we go to the next page. This, again, is the poor soldier from before. And much like with both filmed cinema and much like with any kind of visual art, you have these markers, these visual markers in your framing and your composition, where you want to revisit them because you want to make sure that the audience and the reader understands the space that they're operating in. So he comes back here, you recognize this from before, and then he kind of goes into a corner. And we zoom in here. This is where a lot of my a lot of the influence of like Otomo and Miyazaki kind of come in, where I want to see sweat. Like when you work in a medium that is essentially still static, like comic books, these images aren't really moving. So you have to find another way that the audience can kind of understand what can be happening. And everyone has sweated before, I assume. Everyone sweats. Everyone knows what it's like to feel nervous, and everyone knows what it's like to feel uncomfortable. So if you can convey that visually, that is one thing that you can just show in an instant. This guy's sweating a lot and he's nervous. And then over here, he is now getting his rifle ready. And so then we cut back here, and then we see an Imperial battalion coming through. And so now the suspense is ramped up a little bit. Now you know exactly what the danger is. And obviously, purposefully, you put the tank on an even numbered page so that the reveal, I mean, you could always flip through the book yourself, but at least while you're reading it, in the process, the reveal feels a little bit more organic. So we come over here. We can see now, let me move it over here. We can see now that the enemy soldier is getting a little bit closer. And now the beads of sweat are becoming even more profuse. And then now the enemies, the protagonists, are distracted. And so the captain has survived one more day. Now, with these first, I mean, it says page 17, but first, I don't know, 10 pages or so, you know what's happening in a way, and you know who you're supposed to root for, and you know that in some sense, he needs to get out. In visual, you got the visuals, but when you're writing prose, it's the same thing. You want to paint an idea of why should I care about this character. And you want to get to it as soon as possible. At least that's what I think, anyway. I don't know if you, because you're also a writer, I don't know if you disagree or agree.
I happen to agree, but the point of this is to talk about your
I know, but
don't drag me into this. You're doing great.
So that is how I opened with it, and at the time when I was first doing this book, I only had like a loose idea of where I really wanted the story to go. I did those first dozen or so pages, and afterwards I was like, you know what? I think this can become a larger story, not just something that's an exercise. Now I have to really get down to the bare bones, go back to all the research, all the books that I have read, and really formulate a story that is deserving of the topic, I feel. And cannot just be aesthetics. It cannot just be something that is ephemeral, Like, what am I really trying to say about here? That the human experience transcends everything else? Or am I just trying to say, man, what happened there really sucks? It's somewhere in between, obviously, and with a little bit of historical facts thrown in here or there. I got some really great advice when I was first starting out making this book, which was, obviously the history is very loaded, and you're trying to tell a story. Tell the story you want to tell, and then go back and start putting in the details. Because if the story you want to tell is just this captain really cares about his soldier, then just tell that story. And then locations, names, those things you can fill in, and then obviously as you're filling it back in with the historical facts, you can it's fluid. You can now kind of shape it the way you want. You can kind of organically morph it into something that's a little bit more full. Any questions about that? About how you start off a story? No questions, oh wow, okay.
Just the pages that you showed, you spent, in the masterclass you did such a beautiful job of showing us how okay, what are some attributes for this character? I'm going to try to embody those attributes in this character's facial expression, in their eyebrows, in how their eyes are drawn. Just on the pages that you showed us, the Japanese soldiers, how much time did you spend thinking about what is the expression going to be like on this guy's face, and how were you thinking about each of them as a character with their own relationship to this, or were you conceiving of them as more like background for your protagonist?
A little bit of both. I'll do a really quick sketch of the. I'm going to steal your pen here because I think it's better than my pen. I'm going to do just a really, really quick sketch of the protagonist, the captain. So one of the things I actually wanted to do right off the bat, I'm just going to use the air here to kind of anchor where his face should be, is that I hadn't really seen a lot of bushy eyebrows on heroes. And being Chinese American, I do have bushy eyebrows and I trim them. My dad has really bushy eyebrows. He won't let anyone trim them. So I kind of just wanted to, that was something that was already distinctive. And this is obviously, especially in a lot of Western media, you don't really see these kind of aesthetics on the character that you're told to care about the most, which is heroes tend to be the most handsome. I mean, especially now. I mean, I'm sure back in the day in old Hollywood, you had people who looked like gremlins who were like stars or something, but and when you flip through the book, what I really wanted to convey is this person has eyes that have seen stuff. They're worn. So you give them some bags, a nose right here. You can see that, right? I believe so. And bigger nostrils, which I have, because when I first started drawing autobiographical comics, I kind of drew the character, I think, in a way in your mind's eye. And then I had friends that told me, you don't look like that. And I was like, I know, it's a representation, but no, you really don't look like that. And I just realized that I was morphing the way I drew people, especially ones who were facsimiles of me, in ways that were just kind of ignoring all the things that made, I think, non-white faces look interesting too, So I have big nostrils. So I was like, I'm gonna give this guy big nostrils. And then his lips. And then I wanted to give him that kind of Asian wispy beard. I mean, I can't grow any facial hair at all, but I've seen it on other people. And these very rounded cheekbones that it's gaunt, but it's not threatening as well. You can make cheekbones like this and make it look really threatening. But I was like, I gotta round these out because he has to look. There has to be a sense of vulnerability about him, because otherwise the reader is not going to believe that he can be vulnerable. And then, he looks really sad here, I'm sorry. He has a crew cut, and then we kind of give him there. But then, as I was talking about his silhouette, given your age, have you guys seen Indiana Jones? Okay, all right, okay, I don't know. One of the most striking things about Indiana Jones is you see a silhouette of him and you know exactly who he is. He's got the hat and he's got the whip. You see Darth Vader, you know who that is. You see Batman, Wolverine, maybe not Spider-Man, because, but, so with him, even though this wasn't a uniform that the captain during that time, during that era in the Kuomintang would have worn, I had his winter coat, is it collar, lapel? Lapel.
Sure.
Yeah, kind of just flipped up, almost like a Western, as I was saying, like the man with no name. This is an immediate indicator that he's a little different. He stands out. And then he had a suit underneath. And then from there, obviously, it's just aesthetic choices that you make about how weathered it's going to look, how the wind hits it. So, and then I used to just put these like little lines here all the time. But yeah, when we construct these stories, and especially when we construct these visual stories, everything is just so planned, especially with animation. And with comics, you get a little bit more leeway just because we're not expecting the entire crew to redraw things over and over again. But once again, you want your characters, from that first time you see them, just to convey what it is you want the story to say. And I want this guy to be vulnerable. And I need you to believe that he's vulnerable, but that he's also a little tough. Because, I mean, he's a hero, so. Any questions about this?
I had a quick question.
Sure.
A little different, which is the Chinese characters you put on that one image there. Wonder what your purpose is. Does it say something to an insider from that time who know the history, or is it just tomorrow? This is in context of China.
Oh, you mean like, are you referring to
Yes. Behind the door there.
over here?
Yeah, right there.
I basically looked up what were the flyers that they were handing out at the time. I tried to do it as best as I could. I do speak Cantonese. I'm not great at it because I grew up speaking both. And as I got to a certain age, I was kind of being a little bit estranged from my family at the time. So I was like, in a way, it was almost kind of like ignoring my heritage a little bit. But I've since tried to speak more Cantonese again, and I'm just not great at it. And I definitely can't read or write much of it. But this is not every kid's experience with immigrant parents, but it was just mine. I did show it to my brother who's fluent, and then he said, like, yeah, that makes sort of sense. So he was like, it's fine. Thankfully, like I said, this is made for an American audience, and not too many people kind of rubbed up against it if they could read what I wrote. Yeah. Any other questions? At least about the beginning?
I was just curious because in the masterclass you talked about how, any story that you write is kind of, you're kind of in it in some essential way. And I was wondering, like, this started with this 10-page or somewhere around there sequence, and then you started to decide that it could take on a larger narrative. Did you find at certain points, building on those initial 10 pages, that you found parts of you like in this story that were surprising or something? And since it is historical fiction, but also, outside of your eyebrows and your nostrils.
Yeah. Not just that. No, I'm kidding. I did. There is a character here who is trying to escape to his safety zone, and here she is. She becomes essential for the second part of the book, and there was a huge influence of my mom in this. And my mom, as a character, has actually appeared in many of my books. She was a character in one of my sci-fi books, and then she's actually, in many ways, the aesthetic influence for Lady Who here as well. I'm very close to my mom. We don't always get along about everything, as most relationships with mothers and childs are. But I think a lot of her worldview has affected me for better or worse as I was growing up. And as a storyteller, you can't help but be affected by that, and you can't help but have to navigate that. And so I think what I was really trying to do with some of these characters and with the character that you just saw in Nanjing is like, all right, well, I need someone who is brave. Who do I know is brave? Who do I know is strong? And who do I know is incredibly stubborn and doesn't listen to me? My mom. So there she is. So when I say find ways to put yourself into the story, or that you can't help but find ways to put yourself in the story, that includes family members and parents, and the family dynamics that not only influence your nervous system as an adult, but influence your writing system.
It must be wild too to have your son as kind of the model for the dragon path.
Yeah, he doesn't really get it yet, but hopefully one day he will. Yeah, right now he's still obsessed with other things. But yeah, with my son, I just think, especially with the Dragon Path with Prince Singh, I really wanted to capture what it is I felt was magical about my son. My son is, he's 7 and he's autistic, so he's largely nonverbal, but he's the kind of kid where you get to know him. He has an inner life, and he has this inner world that just kind of blossoms and comes out. And unfortunately, in like a neurotypical world, not many people get to see that. Not many people have the patience to see that. So I wanted to make a story where like my son's the hero because he's my hero, and I just wanted to craft a world that embraces everything about him that I think is special, and it is special. Originally, I actually was also thinking about making the character largely nonverbal as well, and then I asked that not because I didn't ask it because I felt it was wrong. I asked it because it was like that's going to be incredibly difficult to convey a world that has world building in it, because someone's got to say something. If it's just a cat and a kid that's not saying anything, I'm not going to get much across. So there's that. That's a good question, and it led to deeper answers. Anything else? Is my face just getting sweaty for nothing? No one wants to ask me anything? Megan?
You mentioned that you started with an establishing shot, and a couple of times you talked about the kind of cinematic elements of your work, but also that there's something different and distinct about working the static image form as well. Do you want to maybe expand on kind of how, either in a process way or just kind of as you think about your images, like how you kind of think through either like terminology of film, or kind of like how the idea of cinema either informs or is distinct from what you're doing?
Sure. I try not to. The reason why when I use it kind of not flippantly, but I use it very cautiously. I think it's because I think oftentimes people conflate any kind of visual medium with cinematic allegories, just because it's the one thing that they can kind of pull immediately, and I think sometimes that distracts and takes away from the strength of other mediums. But I'm glad you asked that, because when I did another class, I talked about Breaking Bad, and I talked about why Breaking Bad was visually so perfect, because you can turn on Breaking Bad at any scene and you will understand what is happening with its lighting, with the acting, with the pacing, with the staging. You understand exactly what's happening. Even if you're not following the plot right away, you know whether a scene is supposed to be tense, and you know whether or not what you're supposed to be feeling, mostly tension. So I want to go through an establishment shot, and there's a great comic book artist called Will Eisner who passed away, but he was largely considered the godfather of the graphic novel. And one of the things that he always talked about was, you don't need much to establish to your audience what is what. Like I'll just go here. Like if I drew a person right here, just like that, like really fast, and let's just say put him in a coat, and he's walking like that. If I just draw right now the corner of a sidewalk and a trash can and a lamppost, you know immediately this person's going to be in an urban area because there's a sidewalk. You can even expand on that. You can add indicators of light, indicators of shadow. You can add snow. You can add flowers on the ground. So something bad happened. Something like that. And so when you stage something, when you compose something, these are just the things that matter. Like I called it before, the markers that just tell the audience immediately where you are and what you have to feel. So let's go and let's do an establishment shot together. And I'm going to pull something from Breaking Bad because I do think that show visually can teach people a lot. Even if you're just writing, even if you just want to write, like just to observe what that show does, I think is very important. So let's just say Heisenberg is meeting someone out in the desert. I'm gonna draw this really quickly. A little car. Oh, that one, the screen went dead, sorry. And then I'm gonna give it a little bit of landscape. And then in the distance, you can just kind of see some people. Now that alone doesn't say much to us. It just says, okay, car and people. But if I go now to the foreground, because you have a plane, you have foreground, middle ground, background. Now let's just go into the foreground here, and I am gonna quickly draw, to the best of my ability really fast, some rocks, because I'm gonna show you right away where they are. Some really quick rendering here, like that. And then to kind of add a little bit more flavor to it, I'm gonna put, now what kind of lizard would you see in the desert?
Little geckos.
Little gecko. I don't draw those much, I'm sorry. It looks like a Beanie Baby, but anyway.
So cute.
Like that. And then obviously if this is if this was a moving medium, you can have wavy lines. You know, the foreground can be, in terms of the foreground's focus, the texture of that can teach you a lot about the temperature. And put a cactus right here, because that's, hey, that's where you are. And so just from that, and I use Breaking Bad as an example just because they staged things so well. Once you put something like this in the foreground, visually, now I've put the reader in a voyeuristic capacity. You're behind something else now that's right in front of you, and you're watching something really far in the distance. Well, now what does that tell you, and what does that tell me about this scene? What it says to me is, at least for me, is that I'm sneaking up on someone, or I'm listening in. I'm not really supposed to know what they're trying to say. And so when you do the next cut to the next scene, it creates almost like a door opening, even though it's not really a door opening. You're now entering their space, because this is all about framing. This is all about space. And in many ways, that also works with prose, I believe, like just in the way a room is described. Sometimes people walk away from a book remembering more about how that room was described. Not that it's bad writing, but just because that kind of lends us a texture, and I think we grasp onto those things a little bit more, because then it feels real to you. So that's an establishment shot. I'm gonna go to the next page. I might do one more thing. I just don't know exactly what I want to do just yet. That relates back to storytelling and stuff. Dan, if you have any suggestions, I will take it too.
Well, one of the things that I found notable about in the Dragon Path, there would occasionally be panels where the same character would appear multiple times as an indicator of movement, and you've talked about like really slow panels in rapid succession to show like quick movement that doesn't like merit an entire page or something.
Mm-hmm.
But there are occasionally really visually interesting moments, and I can't recall offhand exactly, but where they are, but where you see like a lot of movement from one character, and he just appears several times in the same panel, which with my like limited background reading comic books and graphic novels, that stood out to me as a choice, right? I understood immediately that we're talking about like a lot of movement from this one character in this stable space, but it seemed like a thing unique to comics. I don't have a question here. It's more like a thing that stood out to me and was fascinating.
It's okay. I like when people say nice things about me, so it's fine.
Yeah, like here we go. This, what page? Page 116. We have
116. Let me go to that. Yeah, okay. So this is a scene.
to conceive of that as a panel was really interesting to me. Could you maybe tell us a little bit about like what made you decide to approach it this way? Like why was that the way to articulate this action?
Sure. So basically, as I talked about earlier, when I write, I have certain scenes already marked in my head because I want to make sure that when I think of something that it all flows together and there are no hiccups when I think about how the narrative is going to be strung along. Because you know, do you ever write something and you go like, all right, I have a beginning and I have a middle. What happens in between, I'm not exactly sure yet, but I know I have to get to the middle, and I know something has to propel that. Usually it could be an inciting incident, or it can just be a small character moment that's incredibly intimate. So for this, I knew that when the action in the third act started, there had to be something that kind of broke open the gates in terms of like visually, what have I been seeing before versus what am I seeing now. So basically with this, I was just like, all right, I'm going to go all out and I'm going to do something that you haven't seen in the book yet, which is this person's powers manipulating the landscape and manipulating the world, and kind of basically shifting the paradigm of what is possible as you go forward now visually. So I think I just articulated that on the spot. No one's ever asked me that before.
I was going to ask a similar but not similar question, having to do with like composition, but also how do you pick, because it looks from what you've shown us, like you use very minimal dialogue and text boxes.
Mm-hmm.
How do you pick what text goes on the page?
Okay. A lot of my influences came from a writer named Brian Michael Bendis, who he's probably most famous now for co-creating Miles Morales Into the Spider-Verse. And so he also, much like me, he started with autobiographical comics and then started doing more mainstream stuff. And his favorite writer was David Mamet. And David Mamet, as he described it, was a writer who used is it economic or economical language? Economical dialogue, which was both. Okay, saying the most with the least, and so a lot of how Bendis wrote his books had these silent scenes because he would choose dialogue that was maybe a little bit more terse, very succinct, but it would just get the point across, and then the visuals would have to kind of do a little bit of the heavy lifting moving forward. And so I'm glad you asked that because I think in Nanjing I have some scenes, some additional scenes. Everyone's just running in here. And trying to choose something that's not as morbid. Okay, so here's a scene that I think I'm still proud of, and it's basically when this old guy is asking them to please, can he come along with them? And the captain has rejected him because he's too old, he's going to slow us down. And I could fill it with more dialogue, and the dialogue itself can be morbid, or I can give you this one silent panel, and the way it's crosshatched, the way it's shaded, can kind of just get across how heavy the scene is for this character. And then, of course, it goes into other things that are morbid. This is actually a morbid book. I feel weird talking about it sometimes. Sorry. But that's a good question. Thank you. Anything else? Anyone?
I'm curious about your approach to cover art.
Sure.
How does that work in terms of do you get commissioned to do that, or do you have creative partnerships with the people, and how is your approach to doing the cover art different from kind of the storytelling?
Well, yeah, back when I was still working in comics before Marvel Animation, who I love, I'd be hired by companies and stuff, and so I brought 2 examples of covers, and these are probably 2 of the things you would most likely know about the most. So this was the first Stranger Things comic. It came out right at the height of its the first season in terms of the buzz. And so I think the comic deals with Will being trapped in the Upside Down and what he was going through to kind of fill out the narrative. And this is what's known as a variant cover, so it's not the main cover you buy, and it's just an additional cover. And so with these additional covers, they kind of give artists a lot more leeway in terms of what they want to draw, because, well, it doesn't really have to speak to what's inside the book. Go a little nuts, go a little crazy, and just kind of come up with something that we can sell. And so at the time, I was just like, well, I'm just going to draw a Demogorgon, and I'm just going to draw Will here in the corner, hiding from the Demogorgon. It's a pretty simple, straightforward shot, but anyone who's watched the show can pretty much just kind of gather, exactly when this takes place. And then the second thing I brought was the Walking Dead cover that I did. The Walking Dead, I'm pretty sure you all know, one of the biggest shows of the last decade, I guess. It was originally a comic released in black and white. They're now releasing it all in color. And so I did this cover for AAPI Heritage Month. That's why that's Glenn on the cover doing the stuff. And this one probably doesn't have much narrative integrity. It's just really, I just really wanted to draw Glenn bashing a zombie's head. So.
Okay, as like a follow-up to that, like when you're asked to do the cover art, are you given the interior already? Like, what is the guidance that you get, and how much leeway do you have?
It depends. If it's a series that's been running for a while, they want to make sure that the covers have a little bit of cohesion to them, and just kind of like what it is that they're trying to market. Sometimes if it's a new series and they're trying to gather up as many artists as possible to do covers to make a big splash on the market, they will give me the stuff to kind of like get a feel for it. And obviously if it's a property as well known as Stranger Things, it's like I think they assume they already watched it, so it's not really much to do there. But if it's like a new series, sometimes like lesser known series, it's like, well, get a feel for the book, get a feel for the protagonist, and much like anything else, let's try to make sure this cover can tell a bit of a story as well. So yeah, it's good work, or was.
What's the cover with the pig mask?
That is from a series called What's the Furthest Place from Here? And this is the antagonist. He's just it's about a post-apocalyptic world, but several generations in. So there's like these groups of people, and this is one of the groups, the sects, I guess you could say. And our main heroes are like these punk rock kids, but I don't think they even know what like music is or something. I read the first couple of issues. They're good, but I forgot. It's 2 years ago. I'm sorry.
Can you scroll down and just show us
Sure.
their covers too, so we can see?
Yep. Yeah, this is just becoming a PowerPoint presentation at this point. Sorry. These are just some of the other books that I have worked on and some of the covers. Sadly, this doesn't really. Oh, hi, Megan.
Oh, yeah. Oh, I'm not trying to interrupt you.
Sorry.
I just looking at these and I was thinking about how, like, your relationship to using color, like, because I'm guessing that sometimes you get to use more color, sometimes you work more in black and white, maybe by choice or maybe by necessity. Like, how does that kind of inform your like character building process? Do you have certain kinds of color palettes you like find yourself gravitating towards or really interested by? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, especially with covers, it's not as much just because it's like, all right, what's the best palette for this at any given moment? But with the Dragon Path, I was very concerned with building like a palette that was cohesive for 200 plus pages. You can tell that there's a lot of orange, there's a lot of light purple, which I enjoy. There's a lot of yellow, and there's a lot of red. And part of that is for the intensity that I was trying to get across, and the other part was just because at certain times I just want to convey also temperature and warmth, and like I said, like try to find ways to visually show people things that they've also experienced. Which leads me to one more last thing I'm going to draw before I let all of you go, because it's getting late. In terms of what is it that you can talk about, write about, and draw about that every person is going to like understand. Let's do a really quick panel here. One of the things that I have utilized a lot now is rain. So I'm just going to draw a person here, and Whatever, it's me. All right, there we go. He's old, like that. And his hair is now soaked. And his clothes are soaked, and you can kind of see the rain coming off. And then we're gonna put in just the rain just going through the panel. Almost like you're taking a knife to it. And they don't all obviously have to be parallel because rain is unpredictable. And then you'll see the beads of the rain off the face, off the body, off the clothes. And you can do this in writing as well, because everyone has been caught in the rain before. So writing, drawing, filming, obviously you don't want to waste water, but I found that like this is one of the easiest ways to immediately convey a sense of atmosphere, because everyone has hated this. This is probably not the most like bombastic way to end a reading, because I did mostly drawing, but I think this stuff kind of speaks, I think this speaks to like what it is I'm trying to say about storytelling, both visual and otherwise. Anything else at all? Hi.
So kind of going off Megan's question a little bit, just curious, you've got a wide range of like target audience that you illustrate for. Is there different strategies that you implement for maybe an older audience, for like emotion in a panel versus like a younger audience?
Yeah, with the Dragon Path, I kind of leaned a lot more. Let me try to find something here. One of my biggest influences is Miyazaki, and I wanted to lean a lot more into what is called the Miyazaki mouth, where a character that's very cute and childish will start off with a tiny mouth, and then it will just expand. And like it doesn't matter if it's realistic or not, because it's just trying to convey an emotion. And like the mouth will now be bigger than the face. I mean, obviously not here, but like I kind of copied it a little bit. And so it's just like I would study how Miyazaki conveyed emotion in his films, and his crew, and how his crew conveyed the emotions, obviously as a whole team. And it's just, and that's what's so wonderful about those movies, that even if you're not speaking the language, if the subtitles aren't on, you know exactly what every character is feeling, and that's the thing that I think is the most important. Obviously with the adult stuff, I can draw a lot more gore and a lot more blood, but the biggest thing I actually kind of noticed when I was working on this book for Scholastic is that they run a tighter ship, and when there are more cooks in the kitchen for a book release, there's going to be a lot more oversight over even things like what kind of words you use. If they think an adjective is going to be above the target audience's reading capability, they'll have you take it out, which I find a little weird, because I don't think I use big adjectives, really. They're not that esoteric. So, I mean, at any rate, those are some of the differences. Anyone else? All right, thank you so much for having me, Wells.
Thank you so much, Ethan. That was fantastic. Thank you, man. I will just very briefly remind everyone, the Dragon Path and Nanjing Burning City are both here, available for sale. And our next Visiting Writers event coming up is Tuesday, November 1st. Jessica Coelho will be reading from her newest collection of poems, Liar, which is a raw book about sort of survival, won the Barrow Street Book Prize, and in the words of one reviewer, sings the blues of the ignored. Lots of interesting voices that we don't often hear from in poems get voice in there. She might also read from her forthcoming collection, Yours Creature, which is a series of epistolary poems in the voice of Mary Shelley. Coelho is a brilliant, sensitive writer, and it's going to be a fantastic reading. You can find more info about it on our Facebook page, Wells Visiting Writers, or however you heard about tonight's event. I hope you can join us for that. But please join me one more time in thanking our visiting writer, Ethan Young.
Thank you, everyone.
All
right, have a great night, everyone.
Thank you for coming out.
Yeah, it's great.
Thank you, Bruce.
I love just watching you like sketch these things out. Just be like, oh yeah, here's how you